Hello everyone, my name is Kimberly and today I'll be sharing how I teach reading and writing across the curriculum using a Year 6 science context. This presentation focuses on three connected components. First, I'll unpack how I support students to access a complex science text using the three-stage reading approach. I'll then show how reading is intentionally linked into a writing sequence using the teaching and learning cycle. Within this broader sequence, I'll also highlight specific literacy and numeracy demands embedded in the text and demonstrate why these need to be taught explicitly. Throughout, I'll draw on research-informed pedagogy, classroom strategies, and formative assessment practices that support students to meaningfully engage with disciplinary texts. The classroom text I'm using as an example throughout this presentation is Platypus on the Gold Coast. It's a multimodal Year 6 science fact sheet. Thank you for taking the time to read it before this meeting. The science text aligns directly with two Year 6 science curriculum descriptors. It supports students to investigate how habitat conditions affect survival and how scientific knowledge is used to respond to environmental challenges. As you know, when using a text in the classroom, a thorough analysis identifying learning requirements and opportunities is required. Without this analysis, comprehension difficulties can be misinterpreted as student deficits rather than challenges created by the text itself. This is why structured reading frameworks are essential when teaching content area texts. To support students to access complex science texts, I draw on the three-stage reading approach. Pre-reading prepares students to access the text by activating prior knowledge and clarifying expectations. During reading supports meaning making as students interact with ideas, language, and concepts in the text. Post-reading consolidates and extends understanding by encouraging students to synthesize, apply, and reflect on what they have read. Together, these stages ensure that reading in science is taught as an active, supported process rather than assuming students can independently navigate complex disciplinary texts. Alongside the three-stage reading approach, I draw on the four-resource model to guide explicit reading instruction. This model identifies four reading practices: codebreaker, text participant, text user, and text analyst. Using this framework helps teachers plan targeted instruction to support decoding, meaning making, purposeful use, and critical analysis of text. The pre-reading stage focuses on preparing students to engage with the text. At this stage, we activate prior knowledge, introduce key vocabulary, orient students to text structure, and establish purpose for reading. Preparing students in this way requires cognitive load during reading and allows them to focus on meaning rather than decoding unfamiliar concepts. The first pre-reading strategy I use is a guided text walkthrough. This helps students orientate themselves to how the text is organized before reading begins. Students analyze headings, layout, and images to predict genre, purpose, and content. Ask your students questions such as, what do these headings suggest the text will focus on? By making these predictions, students begin constructing meaning before they read a single paragraph. This reduces cognitive load during reading and allows students to focus on understanding ideas rather than figuring out how the text works. When students understand how information is organized, they are better able to locate and connect ideas while reading. From a literacy perspective, this supports students as code breakers and text participants using visual and structural cues to anticipate meaning and author purpose. Following on from the text walkthrough, I activate students' prior knowledge through structured discussion and a KWL chart. At this point, students understand how the platypus text is organized, so I shift their attention to content. Using guided questions such as what we know about freshwater habitats and human action and how human actions affect animal survival, students begin connecting existing knowledge to the ideas they will encounter in the text. This step is important because scientific understanding relies on background knowledge. Without activating it, students may decode the words but struggle to interpret meaning. The KWL chart also functions as a formative assessment tool, allowing misconceptions to surface early and supporting targeted instruction. The during reading stage is where students actively construct meaning as they encounter the text. At this point, students are not expected to read independently and just get it. This is where explicit teaching is essential. During reading, this is where I would model how meaning is constructed, showing students how to locate information, interpret ideas, and make connections as the text unfolds. Reading becomes a guided and social process, with thinking made visible through questioning, clarification, and discussion. This stage is critical because it is where embedded literacy and numeracy demands are made visible and supported in the moment, rather than retrospectively. Students are positioned as active text participants, and responsibility is gradually released as they learn how to read the text effectively. In short, during reading is where learning happens inside the text. We are not just teaching what the text says, but how to read it. One example of an effective activity sequence during reading is shared reading with think alouds and guided discussion, supported by a KWL chart and a short exit ticket. In this sequence, I read sections of the platypus text aloud and deliberately slow down the reading process to model how expert readers make sense of complex scientific information. I verbalize my thinking to show how meaning is constructed, including rereading for clarity, questioning ideas, and making connections across sections of the text. For example, I might pause and say, this sentence links vegetarian to platypus survival, which tells me vegetation isn't just scenery, it plays a functional role in our protection and food. I also model questioning such as why might this threat be significant, or how does this connect to conservation actions mentioned later. This approach is particularly valuable for this science text because key ideas about survival and human impact are distributed across the text rather than explained in one place. Students are invited to share observations, ask questions, and clarify ideas, positioning reading as a guided and social meaning-making process. The inclusion of the KWL chart and exit ticket provides ongoing formative assessment, allowing me to identify misconceptions and adjust instruction before students move into post-reading or writing tasks. The post-reading stage moves students beyond comprehension toward application and evaluation. Once students understand the platypus text, they begin working with that knowledge, synthesizing ideas, responding to the text, and preparing to transform reading into writing. The stage is purposeful because comprehension alone does not guarantee learning transfer. Students need structured opportunities to organize ideas, evaluate evidence, and consider how texts position readers. Students connect habitat features, threats, and conservation actions into coherent scientific explanations. From a literacy perspective, they increasingly operate as text users and text analysts, applying information and examining how persuasive language encourages environmental responsibility. Post-reading activities also act as a bridge between reading and writing by supporting deeper conceptual understanding and preparing students for disciplinary writing. In this activity, students analyze how the platypus text communicates scientific information and persuades readers to take conservation action. I model the process first by identifying a key survival need, selecting supporting evidence, and analyzing persuasive language that positions the reader as responsible for environmental protection. We then complete another example together before students work in pairs using a scaffold to guide their analysis and short written response. This activity is important because key scientific ideas in the text, such as habitat requirements, threats, and human responsibility, are distributed across multiple sections. The scaffold supports students to synthesize these ideas into coherent explanations rather than treating them as isolated facts. It also prepares students for writing by helping them organize content, reuse disciplinary vocabulary, and understand how scientific and persuasive language work together. The scaffold I'm about to show you is the tool that supports this process. This is the scaffold students use during the post-reading activity. It supports students to move from comprehension to analysis and short written response. The top section positions students as text users, selecting key scientific ideas and evidence. The middle section shifts them into the text analysis role, examining how persuasive language positions the reader. Using the platypus text, this scaffold helps students consolidate understanding of habitat survival, analyze author intent, and begin rehearsing the explanatory persuasive writing required in the later writing sequence. Once students have engaged deeply with the platypus text through the reading sequence, they are ready to transition into writing. This is where I draw on the teaching and learning cycle to structure my writing instruction. The teaching and learning cycle is a genre-based approach that makes disciplinary writing expectations explicit, supporting all students to develop control through guided social learning. Students are guided to develop control over disciplinary content knowledge, language features, and text structure before writing independently. The cycle includes 4 interconnected stages: building the field, modeling the text, joint construction, and independent construction. Across these stages, responsibility is gradually released from teacher to student, ensuring expectations are made explicit rather than assumed. In this sequence, the platypus text functions as a mentor text, shaping the expectations students bring into writing. By the time students reach independent construction, they are drawing on disciplinary knowledge and skills they have already explored through reading. Before I walk through the 4 stages of the teaching learning cycle, I want to show you the final writing outcome students are working towards. Students create a persuasive, informative science text for a real audience. Their task is to explain how human actions affect the survival of an Australian animal and persuade readers to take action to protect its habitat. The platypus text is not copied. Instead, it is used as a mentor text to guide structure, language, and purpose. Students apply those same disciplinary writing practices to a different animal using their own research. Building the field is where we deliberately develop the scientific knowledge students need before they attempt to write. Students begin by again closely reading the platypus text, not to replicate it, but to understand the types of information scientists include when explaining habitat and survival. We then extend this knowledge through guided research. Students use teacher-approved conservation and wildlife sources alongside a structured research table that helps them organise key ideas, evidence, and scientific terminology. This stage explicitly teaches students how to research and organise information. Students may work collaboratively researching the same animal, supporting shared discussion and knowledge building, while still preparing them for independent writing later. This stage is essential because writing quality depends on knowledge. Without strong scientific understanding, students cannot effectively explain or persuade. Building the field ensures students enter the writing process with the content knowledge and language required for success. The modelling stage is where responsibility for writing sits entirely with the teacher. Using research gathered during the previous stage, I explicitly demonstrate how to structure and write the persuasive, informative science task. I model how scientific information is selected, organised, and transformed into written text that both explains and persuades. Throughout this process, I refer back to the platypus text as a mentor. We analyse how the text balances explanation with persuasive language, how evidence is integrated, and how the author positions readers to care and take action. Students are not expected to write during this stage. Their role is to observe how an experienced writer makes decisions about structure, audience, and language. This stage is critical because genre knowledge is rarely intuitive. Explicit modelling helps students understand how disciplinary writing works before they attempt it independently. Joint construction is where students begin rehearsing the writing task with structured support. At this stage, the teacher and students co-construct sections of a persuasive, informative science text about a shared animal. Students contribute ideas and evidence while the teacher guides how these ideas are shaped into effective sentences and paragraphs. This is a highly interactive stage that allows misconceptions to be addressed in real time while reinforcing genre expectations and language choices. Joint construction is essential because it bridges the gap between observing expert writing and becoming an independent writer. It allows students to practice disciplinary writing decisions within supported scaffolding before working independently. Independent construction is the stage where responsibility for writing fully shifts to the student. Students independently research a different Australian animal, plan their text using provided scaffolds, and create their own persuasive, informative science text for a real audience. At this stage, students apply their understanding of genre structure, scientific content, and persuasive language techniques developed throughout the cycle. This stage is critical because it demonstrates whether students can transfer learning from reading, modelling, and collaborative writing into an original piece of disciplinary writing. From an assessment perspective, independent construction provides strong evidence of both literacy and science learning, as students integrate content knowledge with purposeful communication. Before students can meaningfully engage with complex science texts, we need to recognise that these texts carry embedded literacy and numeracy demands. These demands exist whether we teach them or not. If we don't make them explicit, students may appear disengaged and confused, when in reality they're struggling with how meaning is being constructed rather than with the science content itself. Explicitly teaching key literacy and numeracy skills allows students to access, interpret, and apply scientific ideas more competently. It also supports equity, ensuring all students understand how texts work. One key literacy demand in the platypus text is recognizing persuasive language within an information science text. I teach this explicitly by drawing students' attention to the specific word-level choices the author uses to influence the reader. For example, I highlight personal pronouns like we and you that position the reader as responsible, emotive phrases such as shy, elusive, monotreme that creates concern, and strong action verbs like protecting and reducing that encourage action. I then ask students to reflect on how these words make them feel or what they prompt them to want to do. This helps them see that the text is not only factual but also persuasive, guiding readers towards conservation behaviours. One key numeracy demand in the platypus text is recognizing environmental patterns and relationships within ecological systems. I teach this explicitly by drawing students' attention to cause and effect links embedded in the text. During shared reading, I model how human activity leads to erosion, erosion affects vegetation, and vegetation loss impacts platypus burrow stability, using flowcharts and cause and effects chains to make these relationships visible. I support students to explain these patterns using if, then, because sentence frames and signal words such as because, as a result, and therefore. Students then practice identifying and explaining cause and effect patterns using graphic organizers or colored coding tools, gradually moving from guided examples to independent analysis. This explicit teaching helps students understand that scientific meaning is often communicated through patterns and relationships rather than numerical data, allowing them to understand environmental systems are interconnected rather than a series of isolated facts. Thank you for your time. I hope this has highlighted how intentional reading and writing sequences, paired with explicit teaching of literacy and numeracy demands, can support students to engage more deeply with disciplinary texts in your own classrooms. Thank you.